A sugarcane field outside Iwa, on the island of Oahu. A single-engine plane dips low over the crops. To anyone watching from the ground, it looks almost like a wartime newsreel come back to life, because that's exactly what it's supposed to look like.
The aircraft is a Vultee BT-13, an American training plane, gutted and rebuilt. Fresh paint in the colors of the Imperial Japanese Navy, a fake bomb rack bolted beneath the fuselage.
It has been transformed into a Vol, a dive bomber, one of the machines that, on this same island, 28 years earlier, screamed out of the sky and dropped Japan's opening blow of the Second World War. Today, there is no war. There are no bombs. There is only a rehearsal, pilots practicing dive angles for a movie. At the controls is a 35-year-old former Navy aviator named Guy Thomas Strong. He banks, he dives, and something, a misjudged angle, a mechanical failure, a moment's hesitation history will never fully explain, sends the aircraft nose first into the earth. Guy Thomas Strong did not survive.
This is a documentary about a movie. It is also a documentary about what that movie cost. He would not be the last person to give his life recreating December 7th, 1941. Before the cameras had even rolled on the finished film, a second pilot, technical advisor Jack Canary, would also die, ferrying one of the very same modified aircraft after an in-flight fire. Here is the chilling truth at the center of this story. A movie built to honor the dead of Pearl Harbor would go on to claim lives of its own. Real aircraft, real fuel, real gravity, real consequences. This is the story of Tora Tora Tora, the most dangerous, most obsessive, most historically faithful war film ever attempted. A production so committed to authenticity that the line between the movie and the massacre it depicted nearly disappeared entirely. Tora Tora Tora, the movie that almost killed its makers. By 1970, Hollywood had a formula for war epics. Cast the biggest names you can afford, build the story around their star power, and let history become the backdrop. Tora 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 did the opposite. Producer Elmo Williams and 20th Century Fox made a deliberate, almost radical choice. No matinee idols, no box office titans. Instead, they searched for character actors who could physically and temperamentally disappear into the real historical figures they were portraying. Men the audience wouldn't recognize as movie stars, so they could believe them as generals and admirals. It worked. It worked so well that film historians still point to Tora 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 as one of the most convincing ensemble casts ever assembled for a historical event. But that authenticity comes with a cost of its own.
Because this film is now nearly 60 years old, and the men who built it, scene by scene, performance by performance, are almost all gone. This is the ensemble. Then and now. Martin Balsam played Admiral Husband E. Kimmel, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, whose career and reputation was destroyed in the aftermath of the attack. Balsam brought a quiet, controlled devastation to the role. An Oscar winner just 3 years earlier for 1,000 Clowns, he understood how to let silence do the acting. Martin Balsam passed away in 1996 in Rome at the age of 76. So Yamamura took on arguably the film's most complex role, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, and the man who, in the film's most famous line, warns his own government that they have awakened a sleeping giant. Yamamoto gave the character something rarely afforded to villains in American war films of the era: doubt, intelligence, and reluctance. So Yamamoto died in 2000 at 84 years old.
Jason Roberts played General Walter C. Short, the Army commander whose defensive failures, along with Kimmel's, would become the subject of endless post-war inquiry. Roberts, already a two-time future Oscar winner in the making, brought a controlled frustration to a man watching disaster arrive in slow motion. Jason Roberts died in 2000 at the age of 78. Joseph Cotten, one of the last surviving members of Orson Welles' original Mercury Theater Company, a veteran of Citizen Kane itself, played Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, the Washington power broker piecing together fragments of intelligence too late. Joseph Cotten died in 1994 at 88. James Whitmore brought fire to Admiral William Bull Halsey, one of the few performances in the film allowed real, unfiltered anger. Whitmore had already been nominated for 2 Academy Awards by the time cameras rolled. James Whitmore died in 2009 at 87, one of the very last members of this legendary ensemble to leave us. Balsam, Yamamoto, Roberts, Cotten, Whitmore. 5 extraordinary actors who anchored one of the most historically respected war films ever made, and 5 men who today exist only on film.
Quick question. Out of these 5 performances, which one do you think holds up best today? Drop your pick in the comments.
That's the uncomfortable arithmetic of documenting a movie this old. Nearly the entire credited cast, American and Japanese alike, has now passed. What remains are the dozens of uncredited stuntmen, extras, and background pilots who flew, fell, and crashed for this film and walked away. Men whose names rarely made it into any credit roll, but whose bodies absorbed the real physical risk of recreating a massacre. And that risk is where our story turns next. Because the tragedy in that cane field wasn't an isolated accident. It was the first sign of just how far this production was willing to go. Tora 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 wasn't just filmed, it was fought for. A production so committed to physical, mechanical, non-digital authenticity that the chaos of war kept bleeding into the chaos of filmmaking itself. The accidental masterpieces. During a major sequence filmed at Wheeler Air Force Base, one of the remote-controlled P-40 Warhawk replicas, designed to be destroyed on cue in a carefully choreographed line, malfunctioned. It veered off its intended path and plowed directly into a row of other mock aircraft. Stuntmen, positioned nearby for the shot, had to scramble and dive for cover in real time. There was no cut. The cameras kept rolling. Director Richard Fleischer would later admit, "That crash was never supposed to happen the way it did. It was meant to hit the end of the line of planes, not plow through the middle of it. What made the final cut of the movie is not a stunt. It's a documented, unscripted near miss with visibly real human beings running for their lives." Then there's the B-17. During filming, the crew of a real Boeing B-17 radioed in an emergency. A landing gear problem forced them into an unplanned belly landing. Production cameras, already rolling to capture background aerial footage, caught the entire thing. It was too dramatic, too real, and too perfect not to use. That emergency landing, an actual moment of danger for a real flight crew, was edited directly into the finished film. It would later be reused again in 1976 film Midway. The Kurosawa firing. Before a single frame was shot, Tora 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 was supposed to be helmed by one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived, Akira Kurosawa, directing the Japanese half of the story. Kurosawa's obsession with realism was legendary, and on this production, it became consuming. He insisted on casting real corporate executives and businessmen in supporting roles, believing their natural bearing of authority couldn't be faked by professional actors. He demanded exhaustive, museum-grade reconstructions of Japanese naval command rooms and battleship interiors, built to exacting historical specification. 20th Century Fox, watching costs and the shooting schedule, grew increasingly alarmed. Rumors swirled about Kurosawa's mental state and his ability to manage a production of this scale under Hollywood's studio system. The relationship deteriorated beyond repair. Kurosawa was fired before the Japanese sequences were complete, replaced by two Japanese directors, Kinji Fukasaku and Toshio Masuda, who would ultimately steer that half of the film to completion. It remains one of the most fascinating what-if chapters in film history, a version of Tora 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 directed in part by the man behind Seven Samurai, a film that never got made.
The code words and the title itself, it isn't just a dramatic flourish. Tora is the Japanese word for tiger, but that's not actually what the code word meant operationally. Tora, Tora, Tora was shorthand, a radio abbreviation for the phrase Totsugeki Raigeki, lightning attack. It was the coded signal sent by Strike Commander Mitsuo Fuchida back to the Japanese carrier fleet, confirming that Japan had achieved total surprise over Pearl Harbor. 3 words, 1 radio transmission. The confirmation that history was about to change forever. The Frankenplanes. Here's the detail that separates this movie from almost every war film made before or since. There were no real Japanese Zero fighters left in flying condition by 1968, so the production built its own Air Force from scratch. American T-6 Texan trainers and Volte B-13 Valiants, surplus training aircraft from both the U.S. and Japan's post-war self-defense forces, were mechanically and cosmetically transformed. New cowlings to mimic radial engine housings, fake gun ports, modified tail sections, 3-bladed propellers standing in for the originals. Some were converted into flyable Zeros, others into Kates and Vals, dive bombers and torpedo planes reborn from trainer aircraft that had never seen combat a day in their lives.
The illusion was so convincing, so structurally sound, that these converted aircraft didn't retire after filming wrapped. They kept flying, appearing in air shows and other film and television productions for decades afterward. Practical engineering, built to survive scrutiny for a generation. This was a production that manufactured its own history in order to recreate someone else's. Tora 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 remains more than half a century later one of the last films of its kind, a production built entirely on real aircraft, real ships, real explosions, and real risk, in an era before computer-generated imagery could simulate any of it. It is, in the most literal sense, unrepeatable. No studio today would ensure it.
No modern production would accept its risks. But that unrepeatable authenticity came at a price that extended beyond the budget. Guy Thomas Strong and Jack Canary gave their lives attempting to honor the memory of the more than 2,400 Americans who died on December 7, 1941. Their deaths were not part of the story the film told. They became part of the story behind it. Every generation of filmmakers faces the same quiet negotiation. How much truth is worth how much risk? Tora 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 pushed that question further than almost any film before or since, and left behind both a masterpiece of practical filmmaking and a debt to the people on both sides of the camera who paid for its realism.
in memory of those lost on December 7th, 1941, and those lost bringing their story to the screen. If you found this story as gripping as we did, hit subscribe. We're covering more of cinema's most dangerous productions every week.
Nearly the entire cast. Drop a comment and tell us, what's the practical effects movie you can't believe they pulled off? Give it a like and share it with someone who still thinks movies used to be safer.